Now, for more on the budget and the U.S. economy and everything else, I'm joined by Steve Pruitt, former Democratic staff director of the House Committee on the Budget. He's also the managing director of Watts Partners here in Washington, D.C. We also have Lindsay Piegza. He's the chief economist at Stern Agee in Chicago. And to both of you, let me start by asking you your reaction to this recent budget mess. And that's really how the rest of the world probably looks at it. America is unique because we air out our dirty laundry publicly, but the rest of the world sometimes just doesn't understand why it is. Why does it have to be such a big fight over something that every other country seems to deal with every year? Steve?
Well, historically, it has not been a big fight. What we're looking at now is power politics at play, made-for-TV drama, of course, in terms of the shutdown and the dates for the deadlines. But historically, it has not been a big fight. Up until about '96, it actually was voted on as a matter of course in regular appropriations bills. So what we're watching now also, quite frankly, is more of a civil war that's going on within the Republican Party and the different wings of the party not being able to come to any basic agreement on a way forward, which then gets us into this exercise of appeasement where the speaker has to try and piece together a package such that those various parts of his caucus
Lindsay, let me get Lindsay. Does it have to be this messy?
No, it really doesn't. And I would agree that historically it hasn't. But in the past several years, the discussion, if you want to call it a discussion on Washington, has gotten particularly nasty. And so I do expect the conversation to get even more heated going forward. And it's really frustrating, especially from the average consumer standpoint. And we have to remember that as the conversation heats up, consumers are increasingly sensitive to this sort of political theater or mudslinging simply because the conversation did result in a 2% payroll increase this year. So even if we don't see a resolution result in a tax increase, it could have a very negative impact on consumers and businesses in their inability or unwillingness to spend going forward.
Lindsay, Steve, I want you, both of you, to take a listen to this.
The Tea Party Republicans have taken it to a whole new level because they're threatening either to shut down the government or shut down the entire economy by refusing to let America pay its bills for the first time in history, unless I agree to gut a law that will help millions of people.
Steve, I mean, those are very strong words by the president, and something that struck out at me was the fact that he said that the economy would shut down. Now, the economy's never shut down. Even when we thought it shut down, it still kept going. That's being obviously exaggerated, but does that do anybody any good when they take the economy and sort of hold the economy hostage, at least in the media?
No, it does no one good. In fact, I'm actually surprised that a year ago we didn't reach a deal, a grand bargain deal, as it was described at that time, because this issue really, in my view, disables the Republicans from having a real face-on debate with the president on policy issues. This is such an esoteric, almost meaningless issue in terms of the political impact, because nobody understands the difference between a million and a billion outside of the Beltway, and certainly no one is into trillions.
There's someone that does understand, and Lindsay understands the difference between millions and billions. I know.
I certainly do.
And something I want to ask you is, here in Washington, D.C., we get completely mired into the bickering and the complaining, but out there in Chicago and the rest of the world and the rest of the country, there is a real anger towards what's happening here in Washington, D.C. What are your friends and your other professional colleagues telling you, and how are you reacting to this, or should we just ignore this completely?
No, I think there's a lot of frustration, and there always is when we see this type of debate and this type of finger-pointing in Washington. But I think the frustration has gotten to the point where the average American is okay with a government shutdown if, in fact, it leads to long-term reform. If we simply get a short-term Band-Aid to this scenario, then we're going to have this discussion 6 or 12 months again down the line. So I think really the average American has gotten to the point where they do want to see an honest discussion about tax reform, entitlement reform, and also Obamacare. There were a lot of unintended consequences that came with the Affordable Care Act. If you talk to businesses that were poised to hire over the past 1 to 2 years, the number one reason they are not taking on additional employees is because of Obamacare. And so these are issues that the government needs to honestly address, and we're simply not having that type of discussion at this point.
And I would just add that the polls that are coming out on a daily basis now do support having that discussion, but they also say just get these budget issues beyond us. And this is, again, why I believe the Republicans are pursuing a strategy here that is unproductive, because now the attention is on the deficit, the debt ceiling, the impact on the economy, and not on the policies that the American people essentially say we should be discussing and deciding how and whether some of those things should go forward.
Such a frustrating situation. Lindsay, Steve, thank you very much. This conversation will certainly continue in the coming days.